Don't try to pull them out, my dad said. Don't jerk the line. Just hold it steady and reel. Keep the pressure up. Every year, in mid-May, we all went down to fish the bodies out of Solsten Lake. There were at least 24 of us, fishermen, hiking enthusiasts, local hunters, all kinds of outdoorsmen. Some even brought their families. Over the past 50 years, it had just become this thing that the locals do. It was horrific, but in another way, it was just business as usual. I was 14 when my dad first brought me along. There were at least 40 bodies that year. At most, there'd been twice as many, and one year, there was only about 4 of them. But they always came in mid-May. That much was for sure. There was no pattern to it. Some were old, some young, some clothed, some naked. They all emerged from the bottom of the lake, their pale barks breaking the surface tension as they floated up. Always face down, eyes open, mouth closed. There were so many bodies. You could probably run on their backs from one side of the lake to the other, if you were crazy enough. The first body I ever pulled up was a pot-bellied man in his early 30s. He was balding and had a rough beard. He still had his glasses on. As I pulled him closer to shore, my dad brought out this homemade ice pick-looking tool and smashed it into the back of the corpse, dragging it out of the lake like a wet fish. "You've got to hook 'em right under the collarbone," he said. "That spot doesn't go soft as quickly." Dad struggled to get the body out of the water. He almost slipped on the wet rocks. With the body fully visible, the green algae stood out like veins on the pallid skin. "He still has his glasses," I pointed out. "Hey, look at that," Dad chuckled. "Never seen that before." Dad took off the glasses and handed them to me, square and thick, with a powerful frame. And yet, I couldn't take my eyes off the dead brown eyes of our catch. "Keep 'em," Dad said, handing me the glasses. "Did you ever catch a live one?" I asked. "Never," Dad said. "They've all drowned long before they got here." "Shouldn't you call the police?" "You mean Officer Ken? He's right over there, kid. Hey, Ken." He waved at a man eating a hot dog 2 fishing spots to our left. The man waved back, putting down a bottle of mustard. "Hey now," my dad smiled. "This looks scary, I get it, but it's just the way things are. We get rid of them and that's that. Then we don't have to think about it for a whole year." "But where do they come from? Where—" Hey, my dad interrupted, leaning down in front of me. "Listen to me. No one knows them, and no one misses them. They just show up. There's no missing persons report. There's no one that comes looking. These aren't real people." "They look real, Dad," I said. "Really real." "But they're not, son," my dad insisted. "They're not people." I spent at least 10 minutes just staring at the pot-bellied man. He had this neutral expression, like someone you might see passing you in the street. Not busy, not angry, not happy. Just some guy looking at me like I was standing in front of him in a line at the supermarket. There he was, lying flat on the cold rock, his dead face staring at me. How could he not be a real person? One by one, they were pulled out of the water. Some were still floating up from the bottom. I saw Officer Ken pull out his 3rd body and dropping it into a pile. The Nicky sisters already had 6, but they kinda cheated. They had 2 bodies floating near enough for them to pull up without having to reel them in. Roy pulled up the body of a naked young woman and got a stern look from his fiancée. Once most of the bodies were reeled in, we brought in a fishing boat. It trawled the lake for a few more hours, just to make sure we got them all. Meanwhile, the bodies were prepared for transport. The smaller ones, mostly kids and teens, were just bundled into bags, while larger ones were cut up. Dad showed me how to do it, all along the edge of the lake. The waters ran red. Not much, but a little. The bodies didn't bleed much. It didn't even seem like violence. There was no one screaming for help, no one begging for mercy. It was all just meat, brought up from the bottom of Solsten Lake. If this was all there was to death, it seemed almost peaceful. Ugly, but peaceful. Kinda takes the mystery out of it. I didn't get to see what happened to them afterwards. Dad told me they were all dumped at an undisclosed location, secret to all but a select few. Same procedure as last year, Miss Sophie. I live up in Alderland, just northeast of Aurora Falls. While I went to school in Aurora, most of my days were spent right here with my mum, dad, and 3 brothers. I'm the oldest, and while my brothers dreamed about travelling the world, all I wanted was to go to prom with Danielle Jacobowitz and get tickets for the Lions Thanksgiving game. In the end, we all got what we wanted. 2 of my brothers went on to study at MSU, and 1 went all the way to Stockholm. And for me, well, that prom date with Danielle turned into a steady relationship, and by the time we stepped into our house, we were engaged to be married. I didn't get to see the Lions game, though. Every year, I help my dad down at Solsten Lake. We aren't excited by it, but there is a special community feeling to seeing everyone pull together in a time of need. Every year there'd be a few new people too. Dad always taught me how we needed to make sure they felt welcome, and to normalise what we were doing. We couldn't have people spreading this willy-nilly. There had to be a level of trust involved. At the very least, they shouldn't have any proof. No phones, no cameras, and no one but the most select few knew where the bodies were dumped. This is the way it's been for years. I'm reaching my mid-30s now, and I've got a kid of my own, Henry. Thankfully, Danielle and I decided to keep him out of this. He's always had his ambitions set on leaving, and we didn't want to burden him with this absurd ritual. 'Cause let's face it, this ain't normal. I know. Last year, things changed. It was just after dinner. As I was putting away the dishes, Danielle came over to me, holding out her phone. "Give me a sec," I said. "Just finishing up." "No," she said. "Now." I dried my hands and studied her expression. She was terrified. I hadn't seen her like that for years. I saw a tremble on her fingers. I took the phone. "Yeah?" I asked. "Is it time, Ken?" "They're alive." My heart jumped up in my throat. Danielle met my eyes, sharing the urgency. "They're what?" "You fucking heard me," said Officer Ken. "We need everyone, now." What do we do? What do I bring?" "Rifles, ammo, maybe a Bible." There were more cars than usual down at Solsten Lake. There were floodlights put up along the lakeside, and I could hear gunshots going off in the woods. The Nicky sisters were handing out reflective vests, and there was an entire crate of military flashlights cracked open. The preppers were coming out, it seemed. Fishing equipment was sticking out of every car on the road, sitting unused. I didn't have a rifle, but I brought a handgun. It wasn't much, but I wasn't prepared. Hell, I had to keep it in my belt. Couldn't find the holster. As I put on the reflective vest, I saw Officer Ken waving people over. My dad had been sitting this rip out for a few years on account of his bad knees, but Officer Ken was as active as ever. That night, however, he was angry. This wasn't hot dog eating Ken. This was trying not to curse Ken. "There's at least 20 people," he said. "Most ran straight for the woods. Some tried to hide." Beth, who co-ran the downtown bakery, just looked at the rest of us, throwing out her arms. I could see she hadn't brought a gun. "So, who are they?" she asked. "Shouldn't we talk to them?" "They attacked the Smalley family," said Officer Ken. "Pulled the 3 of them into the lake. Drowned them." There was a collective gasp. Beth started crying as she held up a hand to her mouth. "These things are dangerous," said Ken. "We're not taking any chances. Shoot to kill." One of the Nicky sisters offered Beth a handgun, which she reluctantly accepted. "Any questions?" So many, but none that Officer Ken could answer. We were spread out in a fan formation along the east side of the river. If anyone heard or saw anything, they were supposed to check in. For every shot fired, all who heard it had to stop and make a check call. This was a calculated seek and destroy. By the time we got started, the others had gotten at least a dozen of them. The bodies didn't look that different from what we were used to. Pale, neutral, covered in algae. Well, maybe they bled a bit more. About an hour into the search, we heard our first shot. Tony Patterson, who built sheds for a living, shot a young man twice in the neck. There was no yelp of pain, no screech, nothing. Just two loud bangs, a check call, and another body for the pile. The forest was getting dark, real dark. The can barely see your own hands kind of dark. Without the flashlight I'd strapped to my shoulder, I'd have been helpless. We stopped about 15 minutes later when another shot went off. We heard someone call out false alarm, and the check call went out. I responded and waited for the search to resume. "Wait," a voice whispered. I spun around, gun first. He was young, early 20s at most. I'd never seen this kid before, but somehow he reminded me of Henry. There was an innocence to him. He was hiding in the bushes, wearing only a pair of sweatpants. He'd been cut up pretty bad by the undergrowth, and his feet were bloody. He was panting heavily, and his eyes were wide with fear. He barely blinked. He tried to talk, but the words got caught in his shivers. This was nothing like the pot-bellied man I'd pulled out of the lake all those years ago. This was a living, breathing person. A young man. A boy, even. I started calling out reflexively. The kid held up his arms to shield himself. An act so human, it made my heart ache. I was the aggressor. This wasn't a killer. I heard the others stop. I tried to force myself to squeeze the trigger, only to feel the safety was still on. I couldn't make myself turn it off. The kid was shivering, covering his face. "I sprained my foot," I called out. "You'll mind if I head back?" "You okay?" someone called back. "Yeah, I'll just meet you back at the, camp." I put my gun away and reached out to help. The kid grasped my arm clumsily and pulled himself up. He was ice cold, with black sores along his forearms. Some sort of necrosis, I suspected. "Can you walk?" I whispered. Yeah, he nodded. "Thanks." "I need some answers," I said. "Is that clear?" "Of course, yeah," he insisted. You got a car. Take the path to the left. Keep straight for a few minutes until you reach the road. I'll pick you up." "Hurry." I felt bad leaving him like that, but I had no idea what I was doing at this point. I was winging it, hoping for the best. On the way back to my car, I faked a limp. Officer Ken wished me the best, thanking me for coming out. It felt awful tricking all these people who trusted me, but I couldn't imagine that kid having anything to do with the death of the Smalley family. There were 20 people crawling out of that lake. They couldn't all be bad. Some had to be decent, and some of them had to have an idea what was going on. We had to use this. We had to start asking questions. I got to my car, pulled around, and took the long way back. When I got to the path I'd pointed out, the kid was nowhere to be seen. As I got out of my car and turned the safety off, my first thought was that he'd made a run for it. And still, in his condition, I couldn't imagine how he'd do that. It took me a few minutes to notice him unconscious, just a few feet down the path. If I hadn't checked, I'd have mistaken him for dead. I brought him into the back seat and covered him in a blanket. I did my best to hide him, as I'd have to go by a few of the others on the way back. Pulling the car around, I noticed I wasn't alone on the road. There were 3 people blocking my path, 2 middle-aged men and a young woman. The woman held a long shard of glass, like a knife, dug into the palm of her skin. Their eyes were black, and their pale skin almost shone in the dark. Their dark veins made them look like marble, shivering statues, and still, not a word, not a sound. I locked the doors and stepped on the gas. As the lock clicked, they started running for me. They were relentless, throwing themselves at the car. One of the middle-aged men got caught under the front tyre, nearly making me careen off the road as his chest buckled inwards. The other man smacked against the hood and was thrown into a ditch. I couldn't see what happened to the young woman. I threw myself on the brake. The moment after the impact, I just sat there, staring into the woods. I'd nearly driven off the road, and my heart was trying to jump out of my chest with every breath. I saw one body, lying still on the road. Another body, broken and battered, lay slowly dying in a nearby ditch. But the young woman was nowhere to be seen. I looked back at my passenger, who was still unconscious in the back seat. Checking every mirror, I still couldn't see anything. I cursed myself and got out of the car, handgun raised and ready. "Who are you?" I yelled. "What the fuck do you want from me?" The left headlight was broken, and the right one was blood-stained, casting a pinkish light on the pine forest. It wasn't much. I forgot to bring the flashlight from camp. I slowly started rotating, looking all around, but it made me dizzy. I felt so weak, vulnerable. I double-checked to see that the safety was off. Then I saw her. She was in her early 20s, wearing a sort of black metal t-shirt and tight-fitted jeans. I couldn't even read what it said. She had this short blonde hair and little wounds all over her face. Thinking back on it now, I'm sure she once had piercings. Maybe they were ripped out. "Just stop," I said. "Stop and just... As I struggled to find the words, she leapt. It wasn't just a jump. I've seen people jump, but that was no jump. Instead, she just took off, vertically, at least 7 feet into the air. It looked so effortless, like snapping your fingers. My brain didn't even have the time to register what happened. It wasn't in my repertoire of things a person was able to do. It'd be like a dog suddenly talking to you, or the sun turning blue. As she descended on me, I could hear a sound. She'd opened her mouth, letting the air pass through her head like a funnel. As she was about to tackle me, I heard her inhale. It was this awful whistling noise, like an inverse scream. I could see every tooth in her mouth as her lips curled back, revealing a black tongue. As she fell on top of me, I was knocked to the ground. Her makeshift glass shiv cut my left arm, but I barely even noticed it. My body felt disconnected from me. She tried to grasp me, but I threw her off. Instead, I got back up to my feet. She rolled past me and leapt back into the sky. I knew that whistling noise would come back down on me in any moment. This time, I acted on instinct. I pulled the trigger over and over and over, and as her body came crashing down, she was already dead. Face down, 4 exit wounds, a big splat on the dirt road. Her face was back to neutral, like the pot-bellied man all those years ago. As I looked at her, I was still pulling the trigger. The empty gun kept clicking, rhythmically, like a metronome. The others came to check on me. They bandaged up my arm, and I was celebrated loudly. 3 kills! I was tied in first place with the Andersons. As I was sent home, they made sure to make me promise to have Danielle give me a few stitches. She'd done it before. The only thing I regret as I took off was forgetting my limp. No one said anything, but I'm sure Officer Ken took notice. He kept looking at my leg. On the drive back home, I noticed something moving in the rearview mirror. As my passenger was stirring, I stepped on the brake, turning around with my hand on my gun. I completely forgot it was empty. It just felt good to have it there. The kid just sat there, barely conscious. He wasn't even looking at me. You got any water? He coughed. Sure. It took me a few seconds to relax. I had a bottle in the glove compartment. Having shaken my car so much back and forth, my glove compartment just spilled out a bunch of trash. Registries, licenses, insurance papers, a few tools, even a CD or two. This car didn't even have a CD player. I handed my passenger the bottle as I started cleaning up the debris. Finally, there was a pair of glasses. It took me a while to catch on, but there was no mistaking it. These were the same glasses I'd gotten from the pot-bellied man. Strong frame, square, thick glass. I'd probably brought them along once and just forgotten about them. As my passenger downed the entire water bottle, he took notice of me staring at the old pair of glasses. Sharing my interest, he tilted his head to the side. Those, they kinda look like my dad's, he wheezed. Where'd you get them?